A reading from Luke chapter 8. When they got to the other side of the lake, in the Gerasene country opposite Galilee, a man from the city was waiting for Jesus when he stepped out of the boat. The man is full of demonic spirits. He's been running around for a long time, stark naked, and he's homeless, sleeping among the dead in a cemetery. The man has on many occasions been tied up and chained and kept under guard. But each time he has broken free, and the demonic power has driven him back into remote places, away from human contact. Jesus commands the demonic force to leave him. The man looks at Jesus and starts screaming. He falls down in front of Jesus.
"Don't torment me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Why are you here?"
"What is your name?"
"Battalion."
He says this because an army of demons is inside of him. The demons start begging Jesus not to send them into the bottomless pit. They plead instead to enter into the herd of pigs feeding on the steep hillside near the shore. Jesus gives them permission to do so. Suddenly the man is liberated from his demons, but the pigs, they stampede, squealing down the hill and into the lake where they drown themselves. The pig owners see all this. They run back to their town and tell everyone in the region about it. Soon a crowd rushes from the town to see what's going on out by the lake. There they find Jesus seated to teach, with the newly liberated man sitting at his feet, learning in the posture of a disciple. This former madman is now properly dressed and completely sane. This frightens the people. The pig owners tell them the whole story: the healing, the pigs, the mass suicide, everything. The people are scared to death, and they don't want this scary abnormality happening in their territory. They ask Jesus to leave immediately. Jesus doesn't argue. He prepares to leave. But before they embark, the new leader, liberated man, begs to come along and join the band of disciples.
"No, go home. Tell your people this amazing story about how much God has done for you."
The man does so. In fact, he tells everyone in the whole city how much Jesus did for him that day on the shore. The gospel of our Savior. Thank you.
As Christians, many of us have a hard time knowing what to do with demon passages like this, because I don't think many of us really believe in demons, or not in a concrete sense. Certainly there are folks out there who think they believe in demons and talk about them freely, but in most cases they tend to think of those demons as more of a boogeyman, a big bad wolf to keep folks in line. They believe in gay demons who make all queer people feel depressed and hopeless. They believe in addiction demons who are out there haunting any foolish person who's used to drugs. They believe, in a sense, that demons are the driving force behind everything in society they don't like, but also that those demons only punish those who somehow invited them in. Conveniently, they never speak of demons for greed or apathy or cruelty, because that might apply to them. So they just stay safe behind their hedges of protection. And when it comes to the rest of us, well, honestly, I think we all just feel a little silly talking about demons. Maybe because we think we're more advanced and understanding than the people writing and reading and living these stories long ago. Maybe we think we'll sound like those people I've just talked about, projecting demonic qualities onto anything they don't like. Maybe we feel like the stories of demons and possession are like the miracle passages. We often believe that they happened then, but we don't believe they could happen now. But whatever the cause may be, instead of entertaining the possibility of actual demons, our approach to stories like this is often to change demonic possession into something else. He had a mental health issue, we say. Or perhaps this was the ancient world's way of describing the effects of epilepsy. I like to dwell in the ambiguity of these things. Sure, it is possible that this man's condition was caused by epileptic seizures or dissociative identity disorder or auditory or visual hallucinations. All of these things are possible. And also, literal demons are possible. Actual possession is possible. That's not my way of saying that I know for a fact these things are real, but what do I know? They could be. Anyway, I have a lot of experience living in this ambiguity because, as most of you know, I spend 40 or 50 hours a week hanging out with people who are essentially in the same situation as the demon-possessed man in this passage. I mean, in my case, they at least usually wear clothes. But otherwise, the situations are about the same. Erratic behavior that they cannot control, caused by God knows what, has marginalized and stigmatized them to the point where they are forced to take shelter in the places that go unnoticed. Doorways of closed businesses, far ends of subway cars, parking lots, and occasionally also cemeteries still today, trust me. And there have been times when people on the street have spoken to me about demons and devils and things that sound odd, and I've found it's best to keep an open mind. So where others in my profession hear a client say something about hell or angels, they assume that this is a sign of poor mental health. I try not to rush. And I have to say, at times, I'm inclined to believe some of the things people say. But more importantly, it doesn't actually matter if it's demons or mental illness. Not to the person afflicted. I doubt the demon-possessed man here would care, even today, if he was being tormented by a legion of hellspawn or if his mind was hearing voices. The source of the problem is irrelevant when the problem itself is so all-consuming. I'm sure when he was running naked among the tombstones, getting dirtier and wilder at the mercy of a body that breaks chains and flings itself around in pain, I'm sure he wasn't thinking, "Oh God, I hope this is just epilepsy." When his ankles and wrists cried out in pain from the repeated trauma of breaking chains and running, I doubt it crossed his mind to hope that this was just increased strength as the result of temporary insanity. And I'm sure when the townspeople fled from him, avoided him, stared at him with disgust, I'm sure he wasn't thinking, "Boy, they'd better be avoiding me because these are actual demons and not just hallucinations." When someone is suffering at that level, completely cast out, no hope of reprieve, living in the wild, being shunned by all other humans, what does it matter the source of their misery? The only reason it might ever be helpful to know what the source of the problem is would be if you intended to fix the problem. But just about everyone in this story has demonstrated that they have no intention whatsoever of helping this man. Not only was their sole attempt to help him binding him in chains so that he'll hurt himself even worse breaking them, not only did they promptly shrug their shoulders after that and just let the guy live naked and wild among the tombstones, not only these things, but when Jesus shows up and does the unthinkable, finally freeing this man for everyone to see, when Jesus does this, they ask him to leave. The man came in and worked a miracle and brought one back to wholeness who had been tortured and left to live among the dead. And when everyone saw with their own eyes that it was the truth and that the demon-possessed man was now healthy and clothed, their first instinct was to make Jesus leave so he wouldn't keep healing people. And yes, we do have to acknowledge the swineherds who have just lost a veritable fortune in livestock. Truly, that is awful for them. But that's also pretty much my point. The people in this town would rather leave this poor man suffering than risk disruption of their daily lives. They'd rather be able to keep going about their day, have a few slices of bacon in the morning, stay away from the graveyard. All of this, to them, is worth leaving a man in torture and bondage. If their normal daily lives would be threatened by this man's wholeness, they're willing to sacrifice him for that. And so are we most of the time. We don't like to think about it, but that's what we do. I remember during my first year at NYU that those of us who were new to the city would often talk about the learning process involved in ignoring the homeless. People would say that they were making an effort to get accustomed to walking by people living on the street without it affecting them, myself among them. That's what we're taught to do. When our society operates in such a way that it brings suffering to the poor, society also teaches us to ignore the suffering it brings, and many of us learn very eagerly. Not only that, but eventually we will start actively taking precautions to keep us from seeing the poor and suffering. You've probably had conversations about the large concentration of homeless people in our city around Mass Ave and Melnia Cass Boulevard. You've probably been told horror stories about what goes on there. You've probably wanted someone to do something about it. Now, if you weren't aware of this, there actually were some pretty serious police sweeps through that exact neighborhood around 3 years ago, and the vast majority of people did leave the area. But because they still didn't have a home to go to, they then found shelter in the surrounding areas: Dorchester, Roxbury, and most importantly, the nearby South End. Because this means that suddenly residents of the wealthy South End neighborhood were forced to reckon with the existence of this poverty, and it turns out they didn't like it. So much so that less than a week after the homeless community was asked to leave Mass and Cass, there was a South End neighborhood meeting to discuss the recent extreme uptick of homeless numbers in the neighborhood. And would you like to know the solution that they came up with by the end of this meeting? It was decided that police and other community workers, such as myself, would encourage everyone to return to Mass Ave. That's it. After months to years of complaining about what happens in that part of town, it took no more than 5 days for everyone to give up on solving the problem and ask everyone to return to that part of town where they could be safely ignored. In our way, we're no different from the crowd of people who saw one man released from his own personal hell at the cost of a drove of pigs. Yes, drove, I looked it up, and decided they'd rather have ham. We can be very concerned about societal issues unless resolving those issues would require sacrifice from us. We are very concerned about the homeless unless we have to see them. We are very concerned about the well-being of our children unless the solution requires us to give up our guns or our political donations. We are concerned about COVID unless we have to wear a mask. We are concerned about gay rights unless someone wants to wear a leather harness to the parade. We are very concerned about those suffering violence abroad unless any of those suffering people wants to come here to escape the violence. We are very caring people when it requires nothing from us. It is easy for us to feel smug and superior over people of the ancient world because we think we know better. Silly ancient people, of course there are no demons, it's just weird brain stuff. But the thing is, the more I think about it, the more I think the people of the ancient world were right to call these things demons. What better word is there for a force of evil that would have us sit by while our children's bodies are blown apart? What better word for an evil that tells us to relax and sip our coffee while a man at the end of our block huddles for warmth in freezing temperatures? What better word for an evil that tells us to seek comfort above all, even if half the world suffers to keep us feeling comfortable? What better word for that than demon? And in terms of possession, what does it matter if these deep-seated apathies that take hold in our brain are monsters from hell or reinforced habit? Maybe there's a hell and maybe they come from there, but maybe they don't. Maybe they come from us. Maybe demons are the natural result of apathy and selfishness in a population. We feed them every time we look away, every time we choose to do nothing, every time we wait for the problem to fix itself. They get a little stronger. And over time, they begin to exert their will more and more until we've given them power enough to ruin lives and spread violence and, well, just look around. And I know it's hard to break that cycle, and I by no means want to suggest that I'm doing better than anyone else here. Because at the end of the day, I know that my work in the world is propping up unjust systems just as much as everyone else's, maybe more. It is daunting to go against the grain of the social paradigm. It comes with consequences. The system will resist any of us who try to fix it, and people at all levels of that system will cooperate. Many react with hostility just upon finding out that you support the poor and homeless. Just the other day, I was handing out food to a few folks I know nearby a grocery store. After one woman walked away, a security guard from the store came up to my van and said, "You know she steals a lot, right?" And when I told him that was none of my business, he waited until I was driving off to laugh and say, "You probably do too." For the record, I have never shoplifted anything in my life, and I would not lie about that from the pulpit. But to this security guard, being in solidarity with the poor in our midst means I must be of some low moral character. It's not just that people get accustomed to ignoring those in need. Some people get so stuck in that mindset that they will demonize you as well just for disagreeing with them. I'm not asking anyone here to completely dismantle the world as we know it and replace it with something just, because I know that's beyond any one of our capabilities. The thing about the society we live in is that it vastly underestimates the things that happen in an individual's life. That's why it's so easy not to worry about all the individuals being left on the street in order to prop up our grossly inflated housing market. But that same society also drastically underestimates what an individual can accomplish. Look at Jesus. He healed one man in this town and was immediately driven out. I'm sure all of the defenders of that society thought that they drove him away and his work was done. But Jesus was smarter than that. When the formerly demon-possessed man asks to follow Jesus, Jesus says no. Jesus wants that man to stay in his own town, visible to everyone. Jesus wants that man to be around and to be seen so that everyone will know that he has been healed and is no longer tormented. And Jesus wants that man to talk about what made him better. With one miracle healing, Jesus infiltrates an entire city. And the thing is, too, that one person visibly helping others has this effect. I've seen it. Sometimes they react with animosity, but more often you find other folks willing to help. You ever been on the train when someone comes through the car asking for cash? You've probably seen them ask an entire train car and find no help whatsoever. But I know, because I've done it, that if you are the first one to take initiative visibly, if you call them over and open up your wallet and pull out whatever amount of money you happen to have that day, someone else probably will. And then someone else. Apathy is a sort of contract in that way. When one person breaks the contract, all the rest of it can go out the window. That's where some of the pressure not to help the poor comes from. We're not taught to stand out. And even if no one else steps up, one person can make such a vast difference in the lives of the poor and suffering. I always strive to remember that both for this demon-possessed man and for those struggling in our own midst, the social stigma propels their struggles to new heights. Maybe they're struggling with addiction and mental health and who knows what else, but I can tell you that their treatment in society gives those addictions and mental health issues far, far more power than they would have otherwise. So any approach to aiding someone suffering in this way necessitates tactics that humanize those being served, that reminds them that they are human and they have rights and feelings and their sufferings are valid, no matter how many people have refused to see this. And you don't need cooperation to do this for someone. You just need to be one person who treats the poor with dignity and respect, and that can do a world of difference. But all this is to say, I know how it feels. I know the world sometimes feels wrong and you want to help and you want to make this world better, but you don't know how to do so any more than you know how to order a demon into a drove of pigs. And I'm telling you, if you just try to resist the apathy that society has trained you in, there will be ripples from that. It doesn't end with whatever you do that day, and those ripples will touch other people who will touch other people. When I was 20, I saw two young men trying to sleep in the cold, and I brought them a blanket. And that started a journey for me that has now become the substance of my daily life and led me to work that brings me such great joy all the time. We don't know how far our actions will move out. Jesus healed one man on the other side of the Galilee, and 2,000 years later, if that town still exists, I bet they all know his name. These things can't stay hidden forever if we refuse to let them, and when we do something to help, who knows how far that'll go. Thank you.
It's a time in our service where we collect an offering. To those attending MCC Boston through our YouTube page, you too can participate by going to our website at mccboston.org and clicking on the donate button there for that purpose. Thank you for being a part of our church family. Members and friends of MCC Boston, UFMCC is usually on the right side of history, but sometimes MCC Boston needs to do a little pushing. Reverend Elder Jim Matulski reminded me of this when acknowledging my attendance on an online Northern California MCC a service where he was preaching. He said, MCC Boston is a church that makes other churches nervous by pushing the envelope and calling UFMCC into question. We did so successfully in the 1970s when we pushed the denomination to use inclusive pronouns for God at a time when most churches used only masculine references. It took time, but eventually UFMCC followed MCC Boston's lead. We were unfortunately less successful in 2018 when MCC Boston attempted to get the UFMCC bylaw language changed for the right of holy union, right of holy matrimony. The change presented would have eliminated the language limiting the right to two people. The UFMCC rules for such changes stipulates that only UFMCC churches current in their assessments can initiate or second such a change. The change must be approved by the church's pastor and the congregation at a congregational meeting. MCC Boston has been current in our assessments for years, and in 2017, after gaining approval from Reverend Mel and our congregation as the representing lay delegate of MCC Boston, I completed the necessary paperwork and readied the submission. Beyond that initial phase, the UFMCC process stipulates that the measure be seconded by two additional churches that must reside in different countries from one another and from the initiating church. Originally, I wrote to 15 UFMCC churches that I felt would participate. Reverend Ines Paul Ballman, pastor of our MCC church in Cologne, Germany, was incredibly helpful with rephrasing suggestions and agreeing to second the amendment. The other 14 churches were unable due to assessment problems, church life issues, or the pastor's unwillingness to approach the congregation with the amendment. I had one pastor accuse me of promoting promiscuity. To this individual, I told the story of my first UFMCC General Conference and the cruelty of that association. In those days, bylaw amendments could be made real-time from the floor of the business meeting. It was at that business meeting where the pastor of our MCC church in Minnesota attempted to make this change. She came out late in life after spending many years being married to her husband. She didn't want to divorce her husband, who she loved and who supported her need to be with another woman. She was simply hopeful that UFMCC would enable her family to be blessed in this way. While she was successful in bringing this to a vote on the General Conference floor, her request was met with disdain by the leadership, and within an instant, her hopes for inclusion were roundly defeated. Post the vote, the conference broke for lunch, and as fate would have it, I rode up in the elevator with this pastor. I won't soon forget the complete disintegration of an individual I witnessed in that small space that day. She left her MCC ministry soon after that. I hope this story leaves you moved and understanding that this need is not about promiscuity, but about love, commitment, and a deep yearning to have your love recognized by your faith community. Unfortunately, the accusing pastor in 2018 wasn't moved and used being too busy to participate. I'm bringing this subject back up because Pride seems like a good time to take stock of who we are as a community of faith, and I believe this congregation is once again up to the challenge of supporting this work. The next General Conference, the first virtual General Conference, will take place in a few weeks. It's too late to manage the process in that amount of time, but after that, we'll have 3 years to work this bylaw amendment. I'm hoping I can count on this congregation to once again help to see this through. Usually MCC gets things right, so in the season of Pride, let us be proud of our affiliation with UFMCC, while also being proud of our reputation as a church that makes other churches nervous. So this week, pray for the continued success of the mission and ministry of MCC. For now, as the basket is presented, please give as you are able, and may God continue to bless you and MCC Boston. Thank you.